Diablo 4 is the newest game in the series from Blizzard, long-standing, much-beloved series pretty much everyone that is into games knows about. But for those who aren't as familiar, it's an action RPG hack and slash with a focus on grabbing up all the juicy loot you can possibly find. The series played a big part in inspiring a lot of current games that are very popular right now. Let's take a look at a few of them, and I'll explain what they bring to the table. Path of Exile is one of the most popular action RPGs out there. It has done this despite having arguably one of the most complex systems for progression in gaming. It plays out in a similar way to something like the Sphere Grid in Final Fantasy X, with many different paths and many ways to make a build that just doesn't work. But when you find something that works, it's very rewarding. You can hop around from map to map, absolutely destroying everything, and it's the main draw and gameplay loop that people come back for again and again. It's constantly being updated with new content, which people jump into through leagues. You can join a hardcore league or a standard league, the difference being that if you die in hardcore, your character dies and you have to restart with a new character. It's also free to play. Path of Exile's endgame involves a hugely fleshed out system of acquiring new maps, going through those maps, and getting higher tier maps. The amount of content in Path of Exile is staggering, and if you're willing to put in the effort, it is highly rewarding. Last Epoch is similar in many ways to Path of Exile, but it's newer and a bit more user-friendly. It also still is in early access, so the current content is still being worked on. Last Epoch also has a class system more similar to Diablo, where you choose a class and you're locked in. This has both positives and negatives since it makes the system a bit easier to use, but doesn't have the high level of customization that something like Path of Exile does. It's still pretty highly customizable. It also has a simpler method of progression. In the game, the end game isn't as fleshed out, but that is changing as the game is filled out more and more over time. For those who are intimidated by Path of Exile systems, Last Epoch is an easy recommend. Grim Dawn is a bit more of a traditional action RPG, which isn't to say it is lesser than games like Last Epoch or Path of Exile, but it plays out in a more traditional way. If you really like the campaigns in Diablo, this is a game that you should definitely check out. And once you finish those campaigns, there are other difficulties and challenges that include super bosses for you to explore. Grim Dawn also has a pretty different feel compared to the previous two games. It's a bit more slow-paced. If you wanted a game to run through and reach the endgame within a reasonable amount of time, Grim Dawn can be finished in less than 30 hours. Of course, if you want to see everything, you'd have to play for much longer than that. Torchlight 2 takes the Diablo formula and approaches it with a bit more of a light touch. Unfortunately, Runic Games, the developer of Torchlight, no longer exists, but this game is loved by many people. It has a lot of the same features of Diablo-style games, hack-and-slash combat, lots of loot, but it's a bit more light in many aspects, with less complicated systems and not as heavy of an endgame. That doesn't mean that it isn't as good necessarily, but if you're looking to sink your teeth into something that is hundreds of hours, then you'd be better suited with the other games mentioned in this list. For those that enjoy something a bit easier to get into, this might fit what you're looking for. Hades is not as similar to Diablo as the other games on this list, but if you're talking about action RPGs, I feel like it might be a crime not to give it a mention. Hades is one of the best action RPGs to come out for a long time. It has roguelite elements, so there will be deaths and going back and forth through areas that you've been through already, but has a clever system that incorporates story aspects into those deaths. Highly recommended for anyone that loves action RPG games. If those 5 aren't enough, or you've already played them, don't worry, there's still quite a few games that hit close to the mark. Titan Quest is a decent ARPG that a lot of people like, and is pretty close to older versions of Diablo. Victor Vran is a very good ARPG that hits closer to Grim Dawn than Diablo, but will scratch the itch for people that want something in the genre. And there are a decent amount more out there, many that are more or less Diablo-like. And hopefully this gave you somewhere to start. Thanks for watching.